Welcome to the We Got You podcast, a network curated for wedding photographers and filmmakers that dives deep into the strategies and tactics to transitioning a side hustle in the wedding industry into a full-time, thriving career. We're your hosts, luxury wedding filmmaker Emma K. Films and luxury destination wedding photographer Hannah Brook Photography. It wasn't too long ago that we picked up our cameras for the first time, having absolutely no idea where it would lead us. Years later, we're traveling the globe for beautiful destination weddings, built our dream lifestyles, and run multi-six-figure careers. It didn't happen overnight and it wasn't easy, but it is attainable and so worth it. And we're ready to teach you our strategies. Covering a variety of topics from both our first-hand experiences and reputable guest speakers' insights crucial for business growth, we're exploring the art of marketing within your niche, discussing effective ways to attract and retain clients, leverage social media, and build a strong online presence, and so much more. We're not shying away from talking through the challenges of the wedding industry and offering realistic solutions to navigate them successfully. We emphasize the importance of networking, establishing meaningful relationships with clients, and continuously honing one's craft to stand out in a competitive market. This is the We Got You podcast. Hello, We Got You podcast. Happy Monday, happy Friday, whenever you're listening to this podcast episode, whether it be on your way to work or maybe you're in the office, maybe you're at home, wherever that is, we are super excited to be here with you. And this is our second episode with video. So we're so excited. It's the new year. It is a new, fresh year. We hope all of you are, honestly, I hope you've enjoyed the holidays. I hope you've taken a little bit of a break. But yeah, we're super excited to be here. And I'm so excited because I get to do this episode with Sara from Wedditor. Sara, how's it going?
Good. Everything's great. Video's looking great, by the way.
Thanks. Yeah, we're so excited. So Sara works with Wedditor, who is our video outsourcing team. They're my outsourcing team that I work with, who does all of my video edits. And we've had a lot of questions in the Facebook group just about what communication looked like when it comes to outsourcing and kind of like what the workflow looks like. I've been working with Wedditor since 2020. It feels like it's been 4 years now. That sounds so crazy to say. But we've been working together literally since the time that I was like an adventure elopement videographer. And we'll kind of jump more into the journey a little bit later. But I want to walk through with you now really what communication looks like and what the workflow looks like just with an outsourcing team. And I want to say this is not, and I'm speaking totally for both Sara and I here, this is not an episode that's going to be an ad or any type of sales push. This is really about the conversation of outsourcing. Like, as I know, like it is so important that you find the right fit for you. And again, like I obviously have loved and will rave about Wedditor forever, but we really want this episode to genuinely kind of dig into how to have healthy communication. We know a lot of you out there that I've talked to have been thinking about outsourcing, but you're really just not sure how the workflow really works and like what that time investment is like. And we want to kind of talk about the hard topic of like, what happens when you get your first edit back and maybe it's not what you hoped it is. And really kind of going through like, how do you handle revisions? How does communication look like? Nothing's off the table for this. Obviously, outsourcing there's a lot of stigma around it, which I hate, but this is exactly what this episode is here to do, is just to kind of bridge the gap and open up communication. So before we kind of dive into this episode, Sara, I would love for you to introduce yourself and kind of just talk a little bit about Wedditor and how it got started.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Sara Judd. I am Wedditor's project director. So my job is to lead our project management team. Our project managers are the ones that essentially become your brand's second hand in post-production. They're the ones that get to know your style, and they will watch your films before you even get to see those first versions of your films. So Wedditor was started by our CEO, Michael. He had a video production company in 2007, and they were just getting tired of editing. So he actually started looking locally for editors to hire for help. And as soon as they did that, they realized they had so much more time to grow the business. So that outsourcing of editing, even though it was locally for them, just became such an essential part of them and their business. And then jump forward in time to 2014, Michael's the newlywed. They, of course, hired a videographer, and they had their wedding day, and then they were waiting for their film. They got it back about 6 months later. And that kind of made Michael realize two things. One is that's a long time. but also too that the expectation of what he was going to see, what he got back was much more cinematic than he had been anticipating. It so kind of led him on this journey of trying to see how outsourcing and editing might work within the wedding film industry. So he actually, and this was before there was a lot of like internet resources on outsourcing. He went to wedding filmmaking subreddits and kind of was just doing some research and finding out what the pain points of the industry were. And the editing and the time sink on editing was a huge one. So he said, I have this experience working with editors. Why not try pivoting a little bit and offering that as a service to wedding filmmakers? And then I kind of came at it from the other side of the table. I was a freelance editor. I loved doing wedding films, but I absolutely hated and frankly sucked at marketing myself and staying on top of making sure I was scheduling enough projects for myself and like having enough clients. So I reached out to Wedditor pretty early on and said, hey, like all I want to do is edit. If you can handle securing the work for me and just send me the files when they're ready, that would be perfect. And that's exactly what ended up happening. So started as an editor and just worked my way up. And now I'm in this role, which is wonderful. I absolutely love it.
I love that. And I think it's cool talking about just like hearing from the flip side of you're like, yeah, I didn't enjoy marketing and I didn't enjoy like some of the business stuff aspect of it. So it's like, I would much rather, like you loved being a part of the editing process with Wedditor. And like, even speaking like from my own journey, like I really don't like editing, honestly. I'm not a fan. I love marketing. I love branding. I love networking. I love running the business. Like I would genuinely rather make spreadsheets on budgets and financials of my business than I would edit a wedding video, like honestly. And so it's really cool because I think you kind of see this from all different elements in the wedding video industry and in the wedding market is we all have things that we really enjoy doing and that we really don't enjoy to do in our business. And so when you realize that and recognize it, and instead of saying like, oh, well, I just have to force myself to love it and do it and everything's okay. Like, no, find your weaknesses and have someone else take care of it. Genuinely. Absolutely. Like that's how it's allowed me to grow so much is by being like, okay, here's what I'm not very good at, or here's what I don't enjoy doing. I'm going to give this to somebody else that can do it better. And I'm going to focus on where my strength points are. And it doesn't mean that you stop growing in the terms of where your weaknesses are. I have learned so much from Wedditor, from Azza, from my editor, going through this entire process about editing. But it just means that if I don't enjoy doing it, why should I do it? I want to focus my time like where it's going to give me a bigger ROI and have other people do the things that I don't enjoy. And so it's cool hearing like the journey of Wedditor and just kind of like how that process was when creating the brand, because it really was finding like, hey, like we like can really solve a huge problem for people. And I mean, full transparency, like there are a lot of like wedding video editors out there, but like to find a team that you really feel like is one going to actually elevate your brand. That was the biggest thing for me. I had outsourced with multiple different wedding companies. Like I haven't just used Wedditor. And time and time again, what has drawn me to you guys is I've always felt like every edit was very intentional and we've grown together. And I mean, prime example, like walking back into my own journey was like when I first started in 2020, I remember reaching out for the first time and I was so terrified because I'm like, oh my gosh, what are people going to think about outsourcing? And just kind of joining and being like, hey, like I have this styled shoot edit. It was a styled shoot at the Salt Flats and reaching out and going through that first process. And it saved me so much time. It saved me so much stress. Like I really credited that like in 2021, I wouldn't be in business. I feel like had I had to edit all the films that I had, but like looking back, I used to be like an adventure elopement videographer. I lived in Oregon. I was doing a lot there. And it's so crazy to think then what those edits look like versus today in 2024, now working in the luxury market. And like, I have grown immensely, but Wedditor has grown with me. And I think that is the best thing about it is I don't still have the same edits from 2020. And that's what's so cool is seeing a partnership actually grow with you, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the benefits when you're working with a company like Wedditor, any of the other outsourcing companies. Like ideally, like we knew what we knew when we started partnering with you. We learned so much more about the space and not even just the luxury space. That was a huge topic that thankfully you helped us grow into more. But even like learning more about destination weddings, elopement style, like what really learning how to serve each individual filmmaker while also being able to like keep an eye and grow and continue to be responsive to what
Mm-hmm.
exactly filmmakers need. It's an important part of growth with companies. I feel like when you do work with a company, there is the motivation for us to continue to stay relevant and really stay focused on the industry and how we can help. It might be a little harder to find an editor that's freelance that might necessarily be invested to that degree. But again,
Yeah.
certainly with a company, especially with Wedditor, that is just so it's tantamount to what we do.
Yeah. Yeah. It's absolutely invaluable. So I would love, Sarah, like to kind of have you walk us through like what is the process like when you're outsourcing your first edit? You know, like how do you actually get to know my clients enough in order to edit my wedding video? You know, like and kind of just like how important it is to like leave enough information before you start editing it. Cause I think that's a lot of questions that people, and even I had like in the beginning, it's like, well, how are you, especially when the team is going to start working with me? And when I say you, you know, I'm talking about like the editing team and like
Yeah.
who's editing it, not specifically Sarah here. It's just like kind of that fear of like, how are you actually getting to know my wedding and my client to understand it enough to edit it? I'd love to kind of walk through just what that beginning process is like.
Absolutely. And so I'm going to walk it through the perspective of working with us. But I feel like even if you don't want to work with a company or working with a freelancer, hopefully you'll hear some things that will be able to jumpstart you having these conversations. Because
Yeah.
essentially, when you start a partnership with anyone, it is important to have these conversations. And there's no such thing as oversharing at the start. So thankfully, we've been doing enough that we've gotten good feedback on our client intake forms. And let me take it even a step back from that. We like to get on calls. We like to have a pre kind of partnership consultation, not just to understand your films. By that point, whether it's myself or Michael, whoever's on the call with you, will have watched a few films in your portfolio. I also want to know like where your business is at. Why are you thinking about outsourcing now? What are you looking for it to do for you? Those are all good questions to already have in mind. They can help you also sort what exactly you need outsourcing to do for you, whether maybe it is a fully I don't want to do anything. I just want to send you the materials and have it completely done. Maybe you're not quite ready for that. And that's perfectly fine too. But we get to know you, where your business is, and also what kind of couples you attract currently and what you're hoping to attract. Now, when we start, we always say we want to emulate and then elevate. So we want to kind of get an idea of your mindset now, the mentality you bring into editing. We have questions on our intake form that are designed to kind of get an idea of your workflow, generally speaking, on pretty much all your wedding productions, and then what your post-production looks like. But that's really just one half of it. The other half is my team going in and watching those samples, really analyzing your films, trying to answer questions of like, if I just got this project, how would I get from the ceremony to the reception? When I'm going from scene to scene, am I always going to use location shots? How much am I slowing? Am I
Mm-hmm.
not slowing at all? So there's some deeper level questions that thankfully, just from experience, we're kind of trying to already answer before we get that first project. But in terms of information you give to us, everything should be on the table. You want to be as transparent. And I would rather have like a 4-page doc of all your thoughts and feelings about your editing and your approach to editing than have too little.
Yes. And I think that is something that we like need to echo truly because I know even from my experience when starting, we think that, oh, I'm going to outsource because I'm going to take away like all the time that I'm spending. We think that it's just this easy, like, okay, like here you go. And you're just going to magically think like I do. And you're just going to magically understand how I color grade. And you're going to magically understand exactly how I put together an edit because like that's what you're supposed to do, right? And then I'm going to get an edit back and love it. When you are creating a partnership, this is something that is going to take time. It took a lot of communication in the beginning for us, for me to walk through this is why I edit the way I do. This is why this highlight film specifically is my favorite. This is why, like, what colors I like and why. And a lot of it is explaining why, not just I like
Yes.
this, I like this, I like this, but why do I like it? And so for anyone out there who's thinking about it, regardless of the company that you go through, really think about, am I explaining to them why I like these things? Am I really taking the time to give them the backstory and really understand my style? Because it is a time investment at first. It is not just, here's everything, good luck. Because how in the world are they supposed to understand my mind if I'm not explaining it? And so I think for a lot of us, it's like, yeah, like like you said, like a 4-page document is way better than like, here's 3 sentences. Like, I like romantic, moody, cinematic edits. Like, tell me why. Tell us why. Like, I think it's so important. And I want more people to know that, because I think it turns a lot of people away when at first they're like, oh, but it takes a lot of time to like get through all of this. But like, it's so worth it, because then when you have someone who understands your edits, even if it takes you a few months, for someone to then understand how you edit the way that you do and can emulate that and start to elevate it, just as my experience has been with Ozza, my editor. For her, like, yeah, it took us a while to really understand like what the style was, but to then finally have it and now go through this process years later where it's like she's able to do things that I never would have thought to do in edits. She's able, because she knows what my style is, she knows where we're taking my brand, and she's able to elevate it in a way that's going to benefit me, that isn't where I'm like, why did you do this? This is not my brand. This is not my style. And so the time investment that you're going to put in the beginning is so worth it in the end, because when you've built that partnership with someone, it's way less time long term, but it is that time investment in the beginning. And I feel like people have to know that, but it's so worth it.
And just to add on that too, I think what's so interesting about this industry is we are full of essentially small business owners, entrepreneurs, and all of us. I mean, recently there's been a lot more education content, which has been fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
But each of us come into filmmaking knowing what we know when we start. And, our approach is usually not from some masterclass. It's usually like us kind of just doing things to get it done. And we fall into a certain pattern and we find that we're editing a certain way just because it's what we're used to and comfortable doing. And we kind of evolve from there. And so that's the same idea with editor. That's why it's so important that we emulate first and kind of get into your mindset, so that when you do want to maybe push into a market or elevate, we can make decisions in the editing room that do feel organic to your brand. And like you're saying, it's not just like why would you do this moment? We want to do something that feels like it's intentional and informed and kind of in line with what you're already producing. So you can make some small changes instead of trying to like step out into a completely different realm all at once.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And so just to kind of like give you like that very like actual step by step of kind of what it looks like in the process, when I go to submit my edit, I essentially upload everything. So I make proxy files for my wedding video, all my footage, make proxy files, and I will upload it to Dropbox. So we use Dropbox to go back and forth. It's easy for me. I enjoy it. But I am uploading all proxy files just because it would take light years for me to send you my 4K 10-bit S-Log footage. Proxy files are easy to work with. They're super easy for me to just relink when I get the project file back. But I'm sending that through, making sure that all of my edits, all of my footage is really organized. I organize everything in bins. So if you've got camera 1, camera 2, camera 3, always labeling how many files are in each bin. So that way, camera 3 should have 10 video files in it. So if it's not in Dropbox and if my editor doesn't have it, they can easily see, hey, there's only 8 files in here and I need 10. So I'm making sure that my footage isn't missed. So I'm uploading all those proxy files to Dropbox. And then that next step is submitting that project brief with your team. And it's a pretty extensive project brief. And I love it because it's going through all of the questions that are going to communicate how I want this edit to be put together. And it's even in terms of like, were there any audio issues? Were there any ceremony issues? Any issues with the couple? Like really walking through, there's so many circumstances on the wedding day that don't go as planned that I want to communicate. A great example was I filmed an engagement party back in September. And like the second day of this engagement party, there were like these unplanned toasts that just came up. And so I wasn't able to get like my Tascam connected to it as quickly because it was so impromptu. Moving forward into like putting that into the edit, I wanted to be really selective and really careful and be like, hey, I don't necessarily want a lot of this toast audio going into the highlight film. And this is why. Being able to explain those things, because a lot of the time, if we're not asked the questions, I don't think about it. In my head, we have so many things going on. And I think that is something that is so important that you look for in a good outsourcing team is people that are going to ask you those questions, because
100%.
It's so easy to just skip over thinking about, oh my gosh, I need to communicate that, because in that editor's mind, if they don't hear it, they're going to be like, oh, this was a really good line of the toast. I want to include that. But in my brain as the videographer who filmed it, I'm like, that audio wasn't great. I don't want to put that in the highlight film. And so going through that entire project brief, it's so great. I'm able to kind of talk about the style that I edit with. And I think a lot of you have asked in like with me, with Instagram DMs or in our Facebook group and the podcast of like, how do you communicate the style that you want? For me, it's really looking at your branding. Obviously, like what style do you have? But for me, I really align with, obviously, like a lot of you who watched my wedding videos, I really kind of have this hype to it, but also like the really like emotional, dramatic piece. Like I always love, like a lot of my wedding videos are really hype. They love the party, but I want to give it that drama to it, right? That feels expensive, that feels luxury. It's not feeling like a cheesy, fun wedding video party. It's feeling like, oh my gosh, this party was so epic. There's so much hype to it. It feels dope. Like, and guess what? Everything that I'm telling you right now, I am communicating that in my project brief. I'm like, this is what I want it to feel like. And even thinking about the wedding day, again, you have to go into it thinking this person knows nothing about the wedding day. So what do I want to tell them? And so I'm literally breaking it down of like, hey, for the intro of this film, I really want it to be super hype. The party was really cool. I want it to have like this hype opener to it that's dramatic, that feels like, wow, like a concert, like I want to be there. I want to give it a really dramatic opening. Like I loved the couple portraits that I did. Like let's infuse some drone shots there. And then we can kind of walk through and tell like the more emotional, the main part of the wedding day, and then end it with like a different song that's just like hype of the reception. And it really is just honestly over communication. Like Sara said, like she'd rather have a 4-page, like I would hope that you don't need 4 pages to talk about the style of your edits. Like we will say like bringing the reality in here, but I have written novels on project briefs. Sara's seen them, especially when we first started. I would write novels, but I would rather give way more insight into my brand than not give enough. Because again, it's like they just don't, when we were first starting, you have to go in with, they know nothing about my style and my edits. So what can I give to them? And even if it is kind of that skeleton, like that's okay. Like give them some sort of walkthrough of what you want it to, what you're seeing in your head. And that's kind of how I'm communicating the style. And so that project brief is so beneficial. And every outsourcing company that you look for, you want to make sure that they're asking you those questions. Because if you've just got someone that you're just sending it over to and saying like, here's one paragraph of what the wedding day was like, they maybe could emulate your style, but they're not going to elevate it. And that's a fact.
Yes. And so the project brief Emma's talking about is basically our questionnaire that we send out for every single wedding film that we're editing. And there's no escaping it. If you film the wedding and you want us to edit it, we have to have the notes. And as she's describing, it's really designed to kind of have some checkpoints. So one, assume that when she was saying like with audio, if you had bad audio, like you want to tell your editor not to use that, because otherwise they may be really nervous and just want to use it anyway, fearing that if they don't put it in, you're going to ask why they didn't use it in the first place. So getting those technical aspects helps kind of obviously give your editors something to start going off. It also will protect you as a filmmaker. It's going to make your footage look better. You're going to know that your editor's going to always try to do things that make you as a filmmaker look good first. The other part of that brief is getting to know what's also important to your couples. Now, we used to ask the question, like, say a little bit more about your couples, and we would get basically the questionnaire that you send out to your couples when they're booking you, and like the whole background of like the groom does this and the bride does that. And that's good to read through. But really, I mean, they are being intentional with their wedding. They chose a location for a reason. There's probably details that are very important to them that you learned either through that pre-wedding consultation or from being on the wedding day, you saw was really important to them. So part of that brief is asking you as the filmmaker to tell us what we need to make sure is also in there so that your couple is also getting a film with the things that you know that they want to see as well. So it's important. We view the filmmaker as our first client, but we know that, we want your couples to be totally satisfied with the films and also feel like it is being personalized to them every single film.
Yeah. And it's honestly been so beneficial for me to walk through because every single wedding is so different. It really is. And as I continue to elevate my brand, I'm wanting to work with you guys on how we can elevate together. And that does come with the communication aspect.
Does your current client delivery system feel unexciting, limiting, and boring? Maybe you're still using good old Google Drive or Dropbox to deliver your clients' wedding films. If the answer to these is yes, it's time to level up your video delivery experience with VidFlow. VidFlow is a pay-per-use online platform that allows you to deliver fully branded websites for each of your clients. While being incredibly affordable, VidFlow is accessible on mobile, desktop, and smart TVs with included long-term hosting so that your clients can truly enjoy the entire experience when receiving their wedding films. When I first found VidFlow, it was such an easy switch that truly benefited my business substantially. With so many incredible features and options for customization and personalization, VidFlow continues to wow my clients time and time again. You can find VidFlow on Instagram or visit their website at vidflow.co. Use our code WGY20 for 20% off a yearly premium membership and level up your client experience today with VidFlow.
I'd kind of love to talk about like the revision process. And I
Yes.
think, and we're just doing all the hot topics today.
Yes,
but
we are.
I've gotten a lot of questions in my Instagram DMs and in comments in the Facebook group about what does it look like when you give over that wedding video and maybe you get the first revision back and it's not what you had envisioned. First off, I want to say this is kind of normal. Obviously, you should not get a wedding video back. That's just terrible. But
Yes.
I want you to ask yourself, if in your head you're thinking, oh, this is terrible, I want you to ask why it's terrible. And I also want you to ask, what information have you given before you gave over this edit? Those are the two biggest questions. Because a lot of the times, if you're thinking, I got an edit back and it's just terrible, did you communicate all the information that Sara and I just talked about to your editing team? And if you didn't, then how do you expect for them to emulate a wedding video that is exactly your style? And so a lot of that comes with, you have to do the communication, a lot of it beforehand. And then the second question is asking yourself, if you're thinking in your head, like, it's terrible, I communicated a lot of this stuff to them. This is your first edit with an outsourcing company. My first edit with an outsourcing company wasn't perfect. With Wedditor, was not perfect. And I didn't expect it to be perfect. This is when you take the time to communicate and through the revision process. So I get every single wedding film through Frame.io, which I honestly love that platform. I've used it for my own edits working with like more corporate projects. It's a great review platform. So when Wedditor goes and edits those highlight films for me or doc edits, they're sending me back version 1, version 2 on Frame.io, which is a great platform that I'm able to easily mark, timestamp my comments, my revisions. The biggest thing I can say is it is not bad to over communicate. And it is so important that you explain why you don't like something. Again, it goes back to what we talked about at the beginning. We easily have this mindset that we just want it to be quick and over and easy and done. And if you're just telling your editor, I don't like this, change it. Sure, they'll change it, but they have no context as to why you wanted that changed. There is a big difference in saying, hey, I don't want to start my highlight film with a drone shot because I didn't get any good drone shots of this wedding venue. And a really big difference between saying, I don't want to start this wedding video with a drone shot because I personally don't like opening my films with drone shots. That's just not something that's appealing to me. There's a big difference. If you tell them to change it once, they might change it for the rest of your wedding videos, which could be what you want, might not be what you want. And so that was literally a prime example for me. I used to not like it when we would open my wedding videos with drone shots. And I would just say, hey, switch the shot. And then my editor would do it again because they're like, oh, maybe it's just like this wedding. And I had to explain why I didn't like it, which now it's like, I love opening with drone shots. I'm fine with that. But again, you have to communicate why. Even in your coloring, even if you're going through the edit and maybe it's your first edit and you're like, I just feel like a little overexposed. It could come down a little bit. I feel like maybe I have a warmer style. Communicate that. Say that. If you want a shot changed or maybe you want it stabilized or you want to add a scale in for dramatic, like explain why you want it. And granted, not every single clip you write a novel. Right? There are a lot of clips where it's like, hey, can you stabilize this for me? Or hey, can you scale in for me? And I'm not explaining every single time. And again, when you move forward through the process, your communication, your novels, they get a lot less. So this isn't like you're going to take 30 minutes every single time to do it. But at the beginning, you have to explain why you want revisions made. You have to explain why you want it to happen so that moving forward, your editor knows either not to do that again or to do that again in your edits. Like it's so important to over communicate in this circumstance, especially when you're first starting.
I think it's fair to say that partnerships are make or break in that revision process. If you don't tell us when you're unhappy, we're going to assume you're not unhappy. And then we won't know until you've kind of been put to your limit and you're stressed out and you get another phone back. And you're like, this is just not what it needed to be. And a lot of these circumstances, if we just would have taken a little bit more time and slowed it down at the start and, let you develop that confidence in reviewing. It is a skill unto itself. Most people do not come into our review process like professional and ready to dissect the film. It takes some time. It takes them a couple of days sometimes to really kind of figure out what it is that they want to communicate. And similarly, I think it's really important to understand too that professional video editors expect revisions. You are not hurting our feelings. You are not hurting their feelings. If what you're conveying is done in a professional way, in a respectful way, the editors are more than happy to make these changes because they want you to be happy too. And again, they are learning with you. So this is going to get to a point as you're growing together where it's going to become, a fun process for them. They're going to enjoy working for you. They'll be your cheerleader. They want you to succeed too. But again, don't come into this feeling like you're going to hurt their feelings or like they don't expect feedback or you shouldn't give it. Again, as long as it's constructive, it's all fair game and a professional will expect it.
Absolutely. And the professionalism manner is so important too, because you want to come in and be respectful. Don't come in. There's no reason to be mean to an editor. It's hey, I come in and I'm hey, stabilize this shot, scale in this shot. It's easy. They're small changes. And even some of the edits, it's we're reworking things. I mean, truly, even to this day, as we elevate my brand, there's always things we are reworking. It's not every single edit comes back and I'm oh, that was perfect. Maybe it's hey, there are things that Ozza does that I'm wow, I loved that. That was amazing. I wouldn't have thought about that. This is great. Let's do this in future edits. And there are also things on the flip side that maybe she tries sometimes and I'm hey, not really a fan of it. I love what you did here. Not really my brand. Let's change it. Let's do this. And so it's we're constantly reworking things and trying things. And that is what I love. You do have to go in with that confidence because it's really easy to not speak up about it. And I know this, I've talked to so many people about outsourcing, and that is the common theme is that, if you have a bad experience, it's well, hey, I got an edit back. They didn't nail my style. I'm really frustrated with what it looked like. And you didn't give them enough information beforehand, and you didn't walk through the revision process as you should have. And a lot of it, I will say, it's not all on you as a videographer. But that is why it's so important to find a team who is going to ask you those questions and who is willing and excited to receive feedback. That's what I've loved about working with you guys. I mean, I've done other outsourcing teams and they're not asking me those questions. They're not, you almost feel the stigma of me asking for a revision with other companies. And so, and again, this really isn't meant to be an ad or a sales push. We want you, I know but I rave about Wedditor. I can't help it. I've used you for 4 years. That's just you guys are my team. But in any outsourcing team that you look for those things because you should be in a partnership where you feel comfortable to go through the revision process. And again, I can't explain enough. Explain why. If you don't explain why, you will constantly be reviewing films, leaving 100 comments, saying the same thing over and over again, getting frustrated why your editor won't make these changes. I'm predicting it because I know what happens. But if you explain why and give your editor that feedback, then you both can grow together. And so I think that's just so important.
Yeah. And I'll say this obviously it's music to the ear speaker, how much you love working with us, obviously the feeling's mutual. But even I think it's easy to assume sometimes when you hear people talking about Wedditor and what a great experience, to assume that everyone's just had a rock solid experience from the very first project to the most recent. And the email that we send to clients the first time we share them at the very top say, how many, how should I approach the review process? We basically say, yeah, sometimes it's great. We nail a view one of our first project. There's very little comments. People are happy to take it home. But more commonly, that is not the case, right? If an edit that you watch, you feel is 60% of the way there. So most of the story, most of the progression, the pacing is working for you. It's just little tweaks. I would say that is a good time to, give yourself a little distance, watch it again, watch it a couple times, and then start leaving feedback. If you feel the edit is way off and you don't even know where to begin with a critique, step out. Because I will say that giving yourself some time to kind of calm down a little bit. I mean, and I get it because these are it's an emotional process, and it's really hard to let go of your work in the first place. So when a first edit doesn't work out, that can feel like such a loss and so disappointing. But most films are fixable, especially again, if you're working with us, a lot of companies, like we're here to help you, and your editor is here to also kind of articulate what might not be working. Start to break it down into smaller sections. Like maybe the story's way off. Maybe even just the music was really not working for you the way that you thought it might. And I will say too, like a tip that we see is generally when edits aren't right, it's usually something within the first 2 minutes. It's usually something in that opener, and then kind of like the shot selection or pacing of breath that kind of starts to throw people. It's usually not the reception half of the edit, because I will say for the most part, those are pretty standard across most brands. They're going to show certain things. A lot of little mini events happen in the reception. It's a fun party. It's really the slower, more romantic part of an edit that can feel like not quite on brand for you. And it is such a personalized preference and approach to editing with that. So definitely start there. And again, expect to leave some of those minor things that Emma was talking about, like scaling in, work stabilizer, maybe swapping a soundbite or two, of course. But again, if it's 60% of the way in there, feel free to start tweaking. If it's not there yet, feel free to kind of move back a bit and look at the bigger picture before getting into that detail work. Otherwise, you're going to drive yourself crazy trying to think of everything at once to convey in one single email or on one review page. It's not fair to yourself either to try to do that. It's a lot of work, and it's really hard, and it's very draining.
Yeah. And I would say too, like for any big films that you have coming up, and I mean, we did this at the beginning, and I also think like I've done this like with really big portfolio films as well. I love like going into the project file, and like I will pick out some of my favorite clips that I want in the teaser or that I want in the opener of the film. Like if you've got like a big edit, or maybe it's just your first few edits that you're going to send over. Like again, you have to invest time at the beginning stages for it to benefit long term. But like go into your project file, like maybe you're sending your first wedding over, go into the project file, color a few clips, pull out a few clips that are your favorites that you really like. Not only does this show your editor how you color, they're like looking in your project file and they're like, okay, like this is what they're doing to tweak these clips, but it's also showing off like, okay, here are a few of their favorite clips and why they like them. That is then going to help them move forward into the edit. And not only did we do this at the beginning stages, but I have even done this with some films this year with big portfolio edits. I'm like, hey, here are some of my favorite, like there was a film that I did that was like my biggest film of the year that I like picked out most of the clips that were going to go in the teaser. And I would just kind of like in my cold timeline, just pull them out and say, hey, like here's some of my favorites. Just like note these. And again, it's just giving that information ahead of time. It's honestly like so refreshing to just talk through this because again, like just knowing how much outsourcing has changed like my business. I don't like to edit. And so to have a team that is excited to edit with me and I get to, again, like you get to emulate my work and elevate it, like that is so important to me. I guess kind of like a last question would be the biggest thing I hear is, I can't afford it yet. What would you say to someone who that is like their common theme of just like, I can't afford outsourcing yet, but I desperately want to?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a very valid point. With outsourcing, we say, for the most part, you're going to get what you pay for. Wedditor is obviously one of the more expensive market options. So we're going to start up to the 600s for highlights and kind of go up from there. There are tons of editors, though, that will do it cheaper than that. So I would say if you do know at some point you want to start integrating outsourcing into your workflow, plan for it now and plan for a realistic budget of what you might actually be able to kind of invest in when it comes time for you to do that. And realize you don't have to outsource everything all at once, like 100%. It can be small baby steps. Now, for a company like us, we, of course, want to be editing your highlights. We feel like we're confident enough to go in there and to be successful with that from the get-go. But that doesn't mean you can't start outsourcing calling to a company like Wedding Post House or having companies do your full films or your standalone films, or maybe even just getting some of that initial organization and setup of your project done for you so that you can kind of just go into it and just start editing right away. I know for me as an editor, it's terrible to say, but I was the biggest procrastinator. And I got to a point where even if I said, oh, I'm going to start this edit Monday and I'm just going to work on it bit by bit, I put myself in a position where I needed that pressure Thursday to get it all done. And that's just so draining too. So even if you can't afford to outsource yet, the other thing you could do is maybe just look at your editing process and think about how could you break it down a little bit so you're doing a chunk every day. So for example, my process now is day one, I'm just importing, organizing, and singing, and that's it. I'm not going too deep into it. The second day is when I'm going to start listening to speeches and try to make some decisions about music. Their days B-roll. Because I know too, as much as good intentions I might have of saying like, I was going to sit down and edit for 8 hours straight today, I will get distracted. Other things will come up in the day. You'll get pulled into something else. And before you know it, all that dedicated editing time goes out the window. So I highly advise just to give yourself a bit of a breather and just start breaking that process for you down a little bit to give you some more, to just have an easier approach and give you some of that time back and a little bit more flexibility when it comes to trying to get these edits done. Did I answer the question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. No, you totally did. That biggest thing really is understanding, like, you don't have to do it all at once. Like my very first year in 2020, I only outsourced like 2 or 3 edits. And I knew that I wasn't very good at editing and I knew that I didn't like editing. So I gave Wedditor like my 2 to 3 like biggest films of the year in 2020. And then it was the next year where I outsourced almost all of my films with Wedditor. But it wasn't like, you don't have to just like dive all in all at once and be like, oh, I just can't afford it. Maybe if you're sitting here and it's January and you're like, man, I've got like 3 or 4 really big weddings this year. I would love to outsource them. Take the leap and try. And you'll get addicted. Like that's exactly what happened to me. I was like, this is great. This is life-saving. But don't think that you have to do it all at once. And then again, like I started out, Wedditor didn't start taking my doc edits until literally this past year. Like I would edit my ceremony and my toasts. And now like I outsource it all with the exception of like some social media edits. But it can be a slow growth and that's okay. Again, like think about it also as a partnership. This isn't like, hey, I'm going to send you a film this January and then like maybe we'll touch base in October and I'll give you another one. Like think ahead about what you're really looking for. And for me, I was like, I am looking for a partnership. And that aligned with Wedditor, being that you are really partnership based, was like, I was looking for something long-term. I knew I was going to grow with you. I couldn't give you everything all at once, but here were 2 or 3. And then we continued to do more and more and more. And that's what you really have to look for. Like, are you just looking for like a one and done type thing? Or are you looking to partner with someone who you really can grow with? And that then will build into your pricing. Like I always say, for someone who wants to outsource, like raise your prices a few $100s today and accommodate it right now in your budget.
Yes. That reminded me of 2 other points. So too, when you're thinking about outsourcing, I always recommend outsourcing one of the first few weddings every year. Do not wait to start doing this until you're well into the season. Mm-hmm. What often happens is we start the season with the best of intentions. We're going to stay on top of everything. And then come August, September, October, we're slammed or so far behind. And that panic sets in of like, I got to get these done. I'm going to start outsourcing. And as we were talking about, like it is a process. It's a journey. It's going to take time. You do not want to add you learning to outsource to your plate at the end of the year. So start fresh. Plan to start with an edit that maybe you have the most amount of wiggle room in your turnaround. And that's the other part too. You want to look at your contract and look at your contractual turnarounds. If you are contracted to deliver within 8 weeks, for most outsourcing, that's going to be too short. You want to be looking at probably a 12-week minimum. And again, look at your schedule. If you've got a bunch of, June back-to-back weddings, if they're all due back around, 8 weeks, that means that your freelance editor or your outsourcing partner is going to have to be delivering essentially a wedding every single week, which again, from an editor standpoint, we're also human. We have things like sick days or vacations. So that scheduling can kind of be a little dicey if you don't have a little bit of wiggle room. To the fact that we actually wrote a blog post about this. So if you guys, again, not ready to outsource yet, but want to learn a little bit more about turnaround and setting yourself up for an easier time, wedditor.com/outsourcing. We just did a blog about turnaround.
Yes. Turnaround times are so important. And my turnaround times are going into 2024. They're all 14 weeks. And some of them I think are 16. But it is great to have a longer turnaround time. And I'm here to tell you that that is actually okay. It is okay. Like, don't deliver your highlight film a year out. Don't do that. But it's okay for it to take a few months. Like, these are big edits. You want them to be great. This was awesome. I genuinely love getting to talk about outsourcing because I just feel like there's so much stigma around it. I feel like people don't want to talk about it. And it isn't all rainbows and sunshine. Like Wedditor, like we've worked together for 4 years. It hasn't, I'm not going to tell you, it's just been this like perfect journey every single day. But what's been the best is we've communicated throughout the entire process to where I am so happy like to continue on and like love working with Wedditor because we have that communication of what like a partnership we want it to look like. So before we kind of close out this episode, would love to just have you give off the Instagram handle, website, any other like ways to contact, like what's the best way to kind of like get in touch with Wedditor?
Absolutely. So definitely follow our Instagram. It is instagram.com/we_are _Wedditor, or go to Wedditor.com. If you go to our contact page, it will say that we're full for 2023, and that is true. But at the same time, we would love to get your contact information, because once slots become available, it's not necessarily just a first come, first serve. It has to do with your style, what time of year you're shooting in, what platform you're using. So we literally have just a Rolodex of all that information, and we do reach out to people throughout the year when slots become available. So definitely fill out that contact form. We also will give you a couple other hints and tricks or tips if you are wanting to outsource, but we're not available yet. So again, we're also, obviously, we love outsourcing and we believe in it, but this market's growing. There are plenty of new options coming onto the table every day. So we just want you guys to feel like you're going to get a little bit of a better start in the outsourcing, know what to expect, and know what is normal also from our side. So hopefully it makes it a little bit easier of a jump.
Yes. And if any of you out there listening, like, have any questions, I always want you to know I am very much an open book, and I will be very honest and transparent about my outsourcing journey. And if any of you are out there listening who are like so passionate about getting started, like, I want you to DM me, like, let's connect, and like, we'll definitely like get you connected the best way that we can. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on this episode with us, Sara.
It's my pleasure.
And we will see you next week on the We Got You podcast.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the We Got You podcast. We would absolutely love it if you could take an extra minute to leave us a review and let us know what you think. DM us a screenshot of it and we'll send you a coffee on us. If you want access to an exclusive community, rad freebies, giveaways, and wedding referrals, then join our Facebook group today. Also, if you aren't already, subscribe to our YouTube channel and make sure that you're following along on Instagram at WeGotYou_podcast to stay up to date. We'll see you next week on the We Got You podcast.